There is an entire world of horror cinema that most English-speaking audiences never touch. Not because it isn't good, some of it is better than anything Hollywood has produced in the last 20 years, but because subtitles put people off, or the algorithm never surfaces it, or the marketing simply never reached them. And that is a genuine loss, because horror translates across language barriers better than almost any other genre. Fear doesn't need subtitles. Dread doesn't need a translation. Every film on this list is foreign language, and every single one of them does something that mainstream horror has either forgotten how to do or never knew how to do in the first place. Some of them will genuinely disturb you. Some will stay with you for days. None of them are on any list you have already read. Let's get into it. Kicking us off at number 10 is a Finnish horror film built on a real foundation of genuine national tragedy. In 1960, 4 teenagers were murdered while camping at Lake Bodom in Finland. A real cold case that has never been fully solved and that still haunts the country's cultural memory. Lake Bodom, the film, takes that history and uses it as the setup for something that starts as a straightforward slasher homage and then does something much more interesting with itself. A group of modern students decide to camp at the exact same spot and reconstruct the original murders minute by minute, which is already the kind of decision that makes you wonder about people. The first half delivers exactly what you expect: tension, isolation, the familiar grammar of a woodland slasher. And then, the film pulls a mid-movie twist that completely reframes everything you have been watching and turns it into a ruthless, high-stakes thriller operating in an entirely different register. It is the kind of structural move that only works once, and it works completely. Going in knowing as little as possible is strongly recommended. Coming in at number 9 is a South Korean film that I want to be upfront about before describing it. This is strictly for adult audiences. It is not an easy watch, and it earns every uncomfortable minute of its runtime. Bedeviled follows a stressed city woman who takes a vacation to a tiny remote island where she spent her childhood, reuniting with a friend she grew up with. What she finds is that her friend has spent her entire adult life being treated as a literal slave by every man on the island, used, abused, and completely isolated from any possibility of help or escape. The film spends its first 80 minutes as a slow, suffocating drama about psychological abuse and the specific horror of a woman with no way out and nobody willing to help her. It is deliberately uncomfortable, and it is supposed to be. And then the breaking point comes, and the film becomes something else entirely. One of the most visceral, cathartic, and genuinely shocking revenge thrillers ever made. The tonal shift is extreme and completely earned, and the performance at the center of it is extraordinary. It is not a film you watch casually, but it is a film that justifies the difficulty of watching it. We're now at number 8 with a Mexican horror film that takes one of the genre's most familiar premises and does something genuinely original with it. Huesera follows Valeria, a young woman who has struggled to get pregnant for years and finally succeeds, only for her joy to almost immediately curdle into something darker. She begins experiencing terrifying visions of skeletal figures that move in ways human bodies should not be able to move, bones cracking and folding into impossible angles, and she becomes convinced that her pregnancy has drawn the attention of an ancient predatory spirit from Mexican folklore called the Huesera. The film uses the Rosemary's Baby framework, a woman whose body becomes a site of supernatural conflict, but it is doing something more specific with it than most films in that tradition. It is fundamentally about the weight of societal expectation around motherhood, the loss of identity that pregnancy can represent, and the specific dread of a life path you chose and are now trapped inside. The bone-snapping sound design alone makes it one of the most physically uncomfortable watches on this list, and the practical effects work is extraordinary for the budget. It is one of the strongest debut features in recent horror, and almost nobody outside the festival circuit has seen it. Landing at number 7 is a Spanish horror film from the director of Rec that does something genuinely unusual. It puts you entirely inside the perspective of the villain and refuses to let you out. Sleep Tight follows Cesar, a concierge at a Barcelona apartment building who is incapable of experiencing happiness in any conventional sense. The only thing that gives him any relief is making other people miserable, quietly, invisibly, without them ever knowing it is happening. He focuses his attention on one particular tenant, a cheerful and optimistic young woman, and begins using his master keys to enter her apartment every night, hide under her bed while she sleeps, and conduct a slow, methodical campaign of sabotage against her life. The film is shot entirely from César's point of view, and the horror of it is that the director Luis Verdejo never breaks that perspective. You are not watching a monster from a safe distance. You are accompanying him through every step of his routine, which means the tension is not about whether he will be caught, it is about whether you can keep watching. It makes you a participant in a way that is genuinely disturbing, and it does not offer you the comfort of distance or judgment. It is one of the most effectively unpleasant films in this genre, and it is absolutely worth seeing. Taking the number 6 spot is a Thai horror film that arrived during the J-horror boom of the early 2000s, got largely overlooked because everyone was paying attention to Japan, and contains one of the most brilliantly constructed final reveals in the history of the genre. Shudder follows a young photographer and his girlfriend who are involved in a hit-and-run accident and flee the scene. Shortly afterwards, strange shadow-like shapes begin appearing in the photographs he develops, figures that have no explanation in places where nobody was standing. The film is a ghost story in the classic Asian horror tradition, slow and atmospheric, and building its dread carefully across its runtime. But the reason it belongs on this list is the ending. The explanation for what has been happening, and specifically the explanation for why the protagonist has been suffering from chronic, debilitating neck pain throughout the film, is a visual image so precisely constructed and so deeply unsettling that it has stayed with everyone who has seen it for years. It is the kind of ending that makes you immediately want to go back and rewatch the entire film, knowing what you now know. A Hollywood remake came out in 2008 and was ignored, which is how most people know the name without having actually seen the original. The original is the one that matters. Halfway through the list and stepping up to number 5 is an Indian film that sits right on the border between horror and dark mythology and is one of the most visually extraordinary things on this entire list. Tumbad spans several decades and follows a man named Vinayak and his obsessive generation-long quest to access a hidden treasure chamber inside a decaying mansion in a cursed village in Maharashtra. The treasure belongs to Hastar, a demonic deity of greed who was erased from religious texts for stealing the world's food and gold, and who now sits in the dark waiting for anyone foolish enough to come looking. The film was shot over 6 years across multiple seasons to capture the specific quality of monsoon light in Maharashtra, and it shows every frame looks like a painting, all deep greens and amber and torrential rain. The creature design for Hastar is genuinely nightmarish in a way that feels completely unlike anything in Western horror, rooted in a visual tradition that most international audiences have no reference point for, which makes it hit harder rather than less. Underneath the mythology, it is a story about greed consuming generations of a family, and the horror is inseparable from the moral, which is exactly how the best dark fables work. It is one of the most underseen films on this list, and the one I would most confidently recommend to someone who thinks they have seen everything. Coming in strong at number 4 is an Austrian horror film that is visually pristine, deeply cold, and genuinely one of the most uncomfortable domestic nightmares in recent horror. And before anything else, to be absolutely clear, we are talking about the Austrian original from 2014, not the American remake, which you should avoid entirely. Goodnight Mommy follows twin brothers, Elias and Lucas, living in an isolated, hyper-modern house in the Austrian countryside, waiting for their mother to return from facial reconstruction surgery. When she arrives with her entire face wrapped in bandages, her behavior is wrong. Cold where she was warm, aggressive where she was gentle, indifferent to things only their mother would know. The boys become convinced that the woman under the bandages is not their mother. What follows is a film that plays like a silent game of chess between two children and an adult, building its tension through looks and small gestures and the unbearable uncertainty of never quite knowing who is right. The third act escalates into something genuinely brutal and disturbing, and the film earns it because it has been so precise and so patient in everything that came before. There is an American remake on Netflix with Naomi Watts that dilutes everything that makes the original work. Seek out the Austrian version. We are into the top 3 now, and number 3 is the film on this list that I would most confidently call the scariest entry here. an Argentine horror film that delivers some of the most aggressive and unsettling visual scares of the last decade. Terrified was directed by Demian Rugna, who went on to make When Evil Lurks, and it follows a group of paranormal investigators called to a single suburban neighborhood in Buenos Aires where several houses are simultaneously experiencing violent, inexplicable phenomena. Voices coming from kitchen drains, something throwing a woman against the walls of her bathroom repeatedly in the middle of the night, a dead boy returning from the grave and sitting at his mother's kitchen table, completely still, in the early hours of the morning. That last image is one of the most effectively terrifying things in recent horror cinema. Not because of what it does, but because of how Rugna frames it. He does not build to it. He does not score it for maximum impact. He just shows it to you and lets the wrongness of it do all the work. What makes the film exceptional beyond its individual scare sequences is that it never explains its mythology. The entities behave according to rules that the film never shares with you, which makes them feel genuinely alien and genuinely unpredictable in a way that most supernatural horror, which eventually reveals its internal logic, never achieves. It is currently available to stream and has a devoted following among horror fans who have found it. The mainstream has largely missed it. That will not be true forever. Just missing the top spot at number 2 is an Indonesian horror film that single-handedly revived an entire national horror tradition and is one of the most atmospherically accomplished genre films of the decade. Satan's Slaves was directed by Joko Anwar and is a reimagining of a 1982 Indonesian horror classic of the same name. It follows a family living in a remote house after their mother, a once famous singer, dies following a mysterious 3-year illness. The children begin experiencing visitations in the nights after her death, and as the film progresses, it becomes clear that their mother may have made a pact with something before she died, something connected to a reproductive cult, and that the family's isolation has left them completely exposed to whatever is coming to collect. Anwar shoots the film using traditional Indonesian shadow play techniques, deep blacks, light sources that feel like they belong to a different era, a visual language that draws on wayang kulit puppet theater in ways that give the horror a specific cultural texture that no Western film could replicate. The atmosphere is suffocating from the first frame, and it never releases its grip. It operates in the same register as The Conjuring in terms of its commitment to sustained dread, but it is rooted in a mythology and a visual tradition that will feel completely new to most international audiences. It was the highest-grossing Indonesian film of 2017, and almost nobody outside Southeast Asia has seen it. And the top spot goes to an Iranian horror film that is as politically urgent as it is genuinely terrifying. And that deserves to be talked about in the same breath as the best horror films of the last 20 years. Under the Shadow is set in Tehran in the late 1980s during the Iran-Iraq War, and it follows Shidea, a woman whose application to return to medical school has been rejected due to her political activities during the revolution. Her husband is conscripted and sent to the front, leaving her alone in their apartment building with their young daughter as missile strikes get closer and closer to their neighborhood. Neighbors evacuate. Shidea stays. And something comes into the building, a jinn, an ancient malicious spirit from Islamic and Persian folklore that attaches itself to her daughter and begins making the already unbearable situation genuinely terrifying. What director Babak Anvari understands, and what makes this film operate on a level above most supernatural horror, is that the jinn is not a metaphor for the war. It is an addition to it. Shidea is already living inside a situation of genuine, constant, inescapable dread. The missiles are real, the political oppression is real, the isolation is real, and the supernatural horror is layered on top of all of that rather than replacing it. The film never lets you forget the material reality its characters are living in, which means the horror never feels like an escape. It feels like one more thing. The performance at the center of it is extraordinary. The atmosphere is suffocating in the best possible way, and the ending is quiet and devastating and completely right. It is the best foreign horror film most people have never seen, and the top spot is not a close call. Those are 10 foreign horror films that most audiences have never given the chance they deserve. Every single one of them proves that the best horror being made right now, and over the last 20 years, is not coming out of Hollywood. It is coming from Argentina and Indonesia and Iran and South Korea and places that most mainstream horror conversation never looks. If any of these are already on your watch list, or if you have a foreign horror film that you think belongs on a list like this, put it in the comments and subscribe if you want more of this every week.